Our sovereign lord the king chargeth and commandeth all persons being assembled, that's you lot, immediately to disperse themselves and peacefully depart to their habitations or to their lawful business upon the pains contained in the Act made in the first year of King George I for preventing tumults and riotous assemblies. God save the king. So what's all that about? That was literally reading the Riot Act. And as well as being my favourite pub, this is the very spot where the Riot Act was first read in the UK. So let me explain why that is. Firstly, I need to tell you what a packet ship is. Back in olden days, packet ships were particularly fast ships that were used for sort of delivering mail, valuable cargo. They weren't particularly big, but they were basically the equivalent, I suppose, of like UPS back in the day. And they did a lot of official business as well. They would carry sort of official government correspondence to the colonies and things like that. But the guys who ran the packet ships, they were not very happy with their wages. You know, there's quite a lot of inflation at the time. But they had a little bonus, which was that they effectively, you know, picked up some duty-frees while they were abroad and brought them back. However, one day, customs raided two of the packet ships here, and they smashed open the personal lockers of two guys, one on each ship, and they confiscated all the, as they said, contraband. They said, well, look, this is illegal. Now, the ostensible excuse was, at the time we were at war, and they said, look, you know, if word gets out that you're effectively smuggling valuable cargo, that just makes you more of a target, and people will raid these ships, and then all the mail will go missing. So we don't want to encourage that. But the guys are very annoyed about that, because that was like their little bonus. You know, they said, oh, this is just for personal use, you know, a bit of duty free. Obviously they didn't, they just sold it back here. Which, you know, if you go down the docks today, you can get something very similar. But before this was a fantastic pub, this was the headquarters of the packet ships. And indeed, there's even a little sign that actually says that. Turn that round. So there you go. So all the sailors were rather annoyed about this. And they came up here to complain about it and said, hey, come on, this is well out of order. And, you know, they were worried things were going to kick off. So they called the local constabulary. It's actually, at the time, it was like the private police force of the post office. Private prosecutions by the post office, who'd have thought? And they read the Riot Act. And the guys did duly disperse. And they went across the river to a place called Flushing. And they reassembled here, which back then was the 7-Star Inn. And indeed was, last time I was here, quite recently, but now it's like a really shishy little place. They're very nice though, you know, they did let me in despite me being in all my scruff. And while, you know, all this was going on, they were planning their strategy meeting as to how to deal with this. Across the water, a place called Milo, the Royal Marines were preparing a commando raid to come and disperse all these tumultuous people. However, by the time they actually got over here, everybody had disappeared and gone away. However, the actual newspapers of the time reported that thousands of Cornish tin miners had come down here to effectively support the packet ship guys, and it was all about to kick off, and there were thousands of people rioting in the street, there were police officers injured, they had to call the army in. Now, of course, actually none of this happened. Like I say, they just came here, had their meeting, and then all disappeared off. A few months later, the newspapers ran a story about how scurrilous people had been publishing, quote, fake news about what was going on. And they thought that was absolutely scandalous, that people would spread such rumours of disorder and disturb the king's peace. Even though, of course, it was them that actually run the stories. Plus la change, as they say. But yeah, this is a place called Flushing, which is just across the water from Falmouth. It's called Flushing because lots of Dutch people used to live here. And by the magic of editing, we're now back here. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about sort of how customs operated. I'll try and get you a nice shot, because under here, under this pub, which the old cellars, that's where they actually used to store all the sort of contrabandy type things. I don't know if you can see that. I'll just spin around and stick the selfie stick down there. And while we're on the subject of contraband, this thing behind me is called the King's Pipe. And this was the actual furnace where they burnt all of the confiscated tobacco and other items. And I'll just try not to trip over the dog and get you a nice sort of picture of that. Considering how much contraband they claimed to actually recover each year, that is a suspiciously small chimney. You do wonder how much of it ended up in the local pubs. Also, this particular slipway, now for all you law students out there who've done the case of Crown and Dudley and Stevens, the cannibal case where they had to eat the cabin boy, they walked up these stairs after getting off the Moctezuma, the ship that rescued them. And the first place they came to was here. Now, it's now a pizza place. Obviously, they presumably were full up on cabin boys, so they didn't actually need to eat a pizza. But it used to be the actual customs house. And this is where they arrived, and they had to fill out the forms as to why they had lost their ship. And that included just saying eating the cabin boy. Interestingly, because it was actually compulsory to fill those forms out, because of the rule on self-incrimination, none of that was actually admissible in the subsequent trial. I am, though, going to do a full-on video about that case, because it's really interesting. And as I said before, it's still very relevant today, because it's the key case on the defence of necessity. And it's the one that established that necessity was not a defence to the, quote, M word. But, it's still out there for, when all your protesters, blocking the road. And the building behind me is where they actually were held in jail, much to their annoyance. And a lot of surprise, actually, because most people didn't think they'd actually done anything wrong. Because, the law of the sea at the time was, well, yeah, if you get in dire straits, you draw straws and loser gets it. But obviously it wasn't a car shop back then, it was actually just the town jail. I've got a case coming up which I can't really talk about, but maybe in a year's time there might be something very interesting to talk about, necessity. Also, I'm currently walking down Arwenack Street, and for any sea shanty fans who will know the sea shanty, as I was walking down Arwenack Street, a saucy policeman I happened to meet give me way here to blow the man down. And that was actually all just about not beating up coppers and things, So, like I say, not a lot changes. Also, while I was actually in the pub, talking, because I just shot one bit outside the pub, while I was actually talking to some of my friends at the bar going, what are you doing now, Al? I mentioned, the topic of this video, and they said, oh, when was that then? So I should actually point out, this was 1810, and it is recorded down here as the Cornish Mutiny and everything, a bit like the old Prayer Book Rebellion. I'm surprised there's not a song about it, actually, because there is all about the Prayer Book Rebellion. We've got the song Trelawney, which is like the Cornish national anthem. Will Trelawney live? Will Trelawney die? There's 20,000 Cornish men would know the reason why, which isn't about about 40 of them actually made the trip. And basically, all Trelawney, the worst thing they were going to do to Trelawney was basically retire him early on a full pension. Also, the tune of that song is actually just a Napoleonic war ballad. But I found from personal experience, this isn't actually something to raise in Cornish pubs when people are singing this. Honestly, it's like some people just don't even like trivia. Now, customs have a lot of powers. One of the first things a new monarch does, upon being, you are now the king or the queen, is they sign something called the Writ of Assistance. And that basically allows customs and excise to raid places, like whether it's property or vessels, without a warrant. Because back in olden days, as today, if you wanted a warrant, you had to go to your local magistrate, your local JP. But down here, the local JP would often be the local squire. And usually it was a local squire who was actually pretty much heavily involved in all the smuggling. So they'd apply for the warrant and go, we would like a warrant to search these caves or this property or this harbour, this house on the harbour. And the magistrate would go, yep, absolutely, no problem. I don't appear to have my quill on me at the moment, but pop back in a couple of hours and I'll get that warrant done for you. And of course, by the time they turned up, it would all have vanished. But yeah, so, I mean, like I say, that's pretty much it. I mean, there wasn't really much of a riot. Like I say, everybody did in fact disperse. But I just thought, you might, as always, find that vaguely useful and vaguely interesting. If you did, well, actually, I'm not bothered about subscribing. The funny thing is, in that video the other day where I said, just subscribe to Dan's channel because he's trying to get 500,000 subscribers, literally an hour later, he actually made the target. So I'm glad that you're all subscribing to his channel.